rulebooks of various sports are as dense, convoluted and impenetrable as your ordinary astrophysics textbook. It's not without reason, sports have to make up regulations that account for every possible scenario, which is why golf has a rule about what happens if your ball lands in an orange peel, play it as it lies, and basketball has one about what happens if every player fouls out. We'll get to that. The rulebook doesn't exist to let you know that crossing the goal line scores a 2 count, it's there to define the catch rule that's taken more plot twists than a Shakespearean drama. We'll focus on the bizarre rulings, looking at 13 of the weirdest rules in sports. 1. NFL, Rule 11.3.2, the 1-point safety. Contrary to popular belief, an NFL team can score 1 point in a game. It's a long shot, yes, but so is a 28-3 comeback and an Eagles Super Bowl win, and those happened in back-to-back Super Bowls. If there's a safety scored on any extra point attempt, that would result in 1 point for the tackling team. How would that work? There are a couple scenarios, but the most likely one is this: a team has its extra point partially blocked. The ball squirts to the 10-yard line, where it's picked up by a member of the defensive team, who can now return it 90 yards for 2 points. In trying to make a move, he retreats back into his own end zone and is tackled. Safety. 1 point. It'd be fun, sure, but it's the same point the team would have gotten for just making the extra point. There is a way the other team can score a point and give the NFL the first ever win on the scoreboard, but the scenario in which the defensive team gets a 1-point safety is far more unlikely. Basically, it's just the opposite of above. The kick is blocked and, for whatever reason, rain, snow, stupidity, the ball keeps getting knocked back toward the opposite end zone. An offensive player grabs it and, in hopes of preventing the defense from scoring 2 points or whatever, gets tackled, for a safety, either by accident or intentionally, to give the defending team 1 point. Ideally, they'd have no points when it happened and score no points the rest of the game, and we'd have a 27-1 finish, like an Olympic hockey game between Canada and Laos. 2. Polo Rule 28E. No left-handed polo players. The United States Polo Association rulebook, which is somehow 200 pages longer than the NFL rulebook, dictates that polo players must hold their mallet in their right hands. This is due to the fact that when a right-handed player approaches the ball as a left-handed player approaches the opposite way, it creates a jousting-like situation that wasn't safe for anyone. Not that running around with heavy wooden sticks is safe for anyone either. Oh, and because the rule wasn't reinstated until 1974, any player who was active before then is grandfathered in, meaning, some 70-year-old, left-handed grandfathers could be out on the field racking it up. 3. NFL Rule 3-8, the drop kick. The drop kick is a quirk of the rule book. Instead of kicking an extra point normally, the player takes the snap hand, anywhere behind the line of scrimmage, drops the ball on the turf and kicks it off the short hop through the uprights, he hopes. Doug Flutie did it at the end of the 2005 season just as a lark. Before that, they hadn't been converted since 1941. Why does it exist? The ball used to be rounder and, thus, more conducive to being dropped on the ground and kicked. Place kicking also wasn't a specialty like it's been in the modern NFL. To perform a successful drop kick with an oblong ball requires a precise drop and quick kick, as Flutie showed. The only reason Flutie took the kick is because it was Week 17 and the Patriots were way ahead of the Dolphins. It'll never be used as an actual strategy, especially with the extra points moved back. That's the thing about most of these weird NFL rules. They're from a bygone era of football and only seem to stay in the rulebook, presumably because nobody wants to take the time to remove them. It's only when the rules play a big part in deciding a major game, for example the tuck rule, that the NFL ends up doing something about them. 4. MLB Rule 7.05, catching a ball with your hat. Contrary to decades worth of sitcom plot points in low-budget sports as a baseball player is not allowed to catch a ball in his hat. If he does, even on the simplest fly ball to center, the batter is awarded 3 bases. MLB Rule 8.01F, at bat ambidextrousness. There have only been a few ambidextrous pitchers in Major League history. Your move, Ohtani, but there's still a rule on the books that prevents him from making a situational arm switch or pulling some awesome shenanigans that were almost certainly considered as a set piece in Major League. Back to the minors. First, Pitchers have to clearly indicate with which arm they're throwing. Second, they may not switch arms in the middle of an at-bat. If an injury occurs, the pitchers may switch arms, but aren't allowed any warm-up pitches and can't go back to using the other arm the rest of the game. 5. Fencing rule: don't leave the piece. A controversial end to a semi-final at the 2012 London Olympics was protested by the South Korean team on behalf of a-lam, who was jabbed on a timekeeping error. The first, unofficial, protest took 30 minutes to complete, and officials, seemingly making it up as they went along, ruled against the Korean. Christopher Hanwinkle, USA Today Sports. Now a formal protest was launched, and Shin still didn't leave the piece. Rule said that if she left it to be an acceptance of defeat. In tears, she sat there for over an hour before being let off. Later, her appeal would be denied. She went on to lose a bronze medal match and was later offered a special medal from the International Fencing Federation that she turned down. 6. NFL Rule 11.4.3: the fair catch kick. If a punt returner calls for a fair catch, the receiving team then has the option of attempting an undefended field goal from the spot where the ball was caught. It's an odd inclusion in the rulebook. I have a theory about these that I'll posit later, and would only be realistically used at the end of the half. Let's say a team punts to run out the clock. Even with no time remaining, the return team is allowed to call fair catch and attempt a field goal from that spot. There are no defenders, they stand 10 yards away, and no tees, which makes them like a hybrid kickoff/field goal. This doesn't happen. It's rare for punts to end halves and be caught close enough to make a fair catch kick a reasonable choice. That's why it's been 40 years since a successful conversion, and it's so rare that even the attempts get headlines. The 49ers attempted a 71-yard kick during the Jim Harbaugh era. On the other sideline, it was clear Jeff Fisher was completely unfamiliar with the intricacies of the rule, but it failed. 7. NHL Rule 60.3: the blood rule. High sticking is a minor penalty that sends players to the penalty box for 2 minutes. But for high sticking that results in injury, refs can assess a double minor, which means 4 minutes in the box. What constitutes an injury? Though the rulebook doesn't specifically say blood, it's pretty much blood. 8. NCAA Basketball Rule 4-1: dunking before the game. When the final 20-minute countdown begins before the tip of a college basketball game. This usually happens when players are in the middle of their first warm-up. Players are no longer allowed to dunk. This got Kansas State into trouble once when a walk-on dunked in the layup line just 2 seconds after the clock started running. That led to the other team taking a 1-0 lead before the game had even started. They missed one of the free throws. The official rule also mentions some other little-known reasons for technicals. Paraphrase: A. Face guarding. B. Climbing or lifting a teammate. C. Attempting a free throw that's not yours to take. D. Possessing or using tobacco. E. Pre-game dunking. Man, good thing that walk-on wasn't getting a piggyback from a teammate while smoking a cigarette, or else K-State would have lost the game before it started. 9. NHL Rule 84.2: no pulling the goalie. If a team pulls a goalie in overtime, it forfeits a right to the 1 point that comes with an overtime loss. This was a necessary rule when there were no shootouts, and teams could have theoretically pulled the goalie for an extra attacker with no consequences. It was either win or loss, so pulling a goalie would be a calculated risk. Now, with the shootout looming, there's almost no reason to do it except, perhaps, as a late-season Hail Mary to avoid said shootout. That's because wins in regulation and overtime are used as a second playoff tiebreaker. 10. MLB Rule 2.00: the up-the-middle foul ball. When can a line drive up the middle be a foul ball? When it hits the pitching rubber. If a ball isn't touched by a fielder and caroms from the rubber to foul territory along the first and third base paths, it's foul. This makes sense logically. A ball hit in fair territory down the first base line can be fair one moment and foul the next, but it's odd to think of that ever happening to a hot shot up the middle. 11. European Chess Union Regulation 13.2: no cleavage, revoked. It was the biggest chess story since Deep Blue. Back in 2012, the European Chess Union decreed that women wearing shirts or blouses may only have the second from the top button open during competition. It was, in essence, an anti-cleavage rule. This was treated with mockery in the worldwide press because dress codes are one thing, Men have them in chess too, no hills, beachwear or body odor, but this S like nuns pulling out a ruler to measure the length of girls' skirts. In the 2017 edition of the rules, there is no mention of the second, from the top button provision, which suggests the ECU quietly, and smartly, got rid of it. 12. ITF Rule 26, hadn't ball hindrance if the player's hat accidentally falls off, rare, or a ball falls out of a pocket, slightly more common, then the point is replayed, as the distraction is considered a hindrance. This is the same rule that Serena Williams was busted on during the 2011 US Open final when she yelled "come on!" as her opponent was hitting a shot. She was, not very accepting of the penalty. A more recent example came in the 2012 US Open when Andy Murray's hat fell off at the moment he was hitting a drop shot on Thomas Berdych. The Czech player insisted he'd been interrupted by the hat falling even though, as replay clearly showed, he wasn't getting to the ball no matter what. Robert Deutsch, USA Today staffed the sporting thing to do would have been to give the point to Murray. But Murray and Berdych had beef in the past, most players in Berdych have beef, and Berdych wasn't going to let up. They replayed the point, it had been a break point for Berdych, and Berdych won it, getting the break instead of the game going to deuce. Andy Murray, it should be said, was not very accepting of the penalty, though he took it a lot better than Serena. 13. Golf Rule 11-3, that's 1. Even after making some sweeping changes that attempted to make golf rules more reasonable and adhering to common sense, there are still dozens of rules on the book that are preposterous and penal for no apparent reason. Having to play balls in man-made divots but getting relief from sprinkler heads, fences, etc. is probably the worst one, but we've heard about those rules a ton. So instead of listing every insane golfer rule, here's an old one that continues to be shockingly fair. Anyone who's played golf, has teed up their ball only to see it fall off the tee, whether because of an unintentional knock, balance, wonder or waggle. Every time this happens, the same clown in your force and yells "that's one" and everybody laughs and lets you tee back up without penalty because, come on, we're playing for beers on a Muni, not Augusta. Oddly, that's been the rule all along. A ball that falls off a tee is allowed to be replaced for no penalty, even if it was knocked off by an errant club motion or waggle. If you make a real swing and it falls off, tough luck. Golf, the